Ancient Rome by Braden Clark, Thomas Camilleri, and Aidan Dolan. What kind of materials were used in ancient Rome?
Mud brick was one of the earlier materials used in ancient Rome. It was known as later or unfired brick. They dried in the sun, very strong, and they were very easy to make. So it conserved energy very well. It was very vulnerable to rain and habitable to vermin and parasites, causing damage to the overall structure over time. It was very easy to transport, and it would take away the burden of transporting heavy materials and bulky materials over long distances, and it allowed for lower building costs. Opus incertum was one of the later materials used in ancient Rome. It was typically used in the more special buildings in the city and was typically more durable than the mud brick material. It was built out of a composite of stone bound together by a mortar of lime mixed with volcanic ash. Um, it required more skill and labor than mud brick, so it was not as easy and required more energy. It was still made from local materials that didn't use or required too much energy to prepare before use, and it was also much better than mud brick at keeping heat inside of the buildings, so it was preferred in winter. Concrete was another material that was used quite often in Rome. It was extremely durable and very long lasting. In fact, it lasts longer than modern concrete. It was one of the primary structural support systems for many of the Roman buildings. Um, it also uses far less energy compared to modern concrete as it does not require being burnt in a kiln. It consisted of white powder known as slaked lime, small particles, and rock fragments known as tephra, which were actually ejected from volcanic eruptions. And they used water to set this concrete. Um, it did not require intense heat and preserved the Romans' dwindling timber supply. Marble was another material that was used quite often in ancient Rome. It was typically used on the more important buildings in the city, and it was never used for its structural integrity. Instead, it was used for its decorative purposes. It was also typically used as a veneer on top of their very strong concrete and other supporting structures. They did this because it was very expensive and required a lot of energy to harvest and move. It was transported long distances from labor intensive mines across the Roman Empire. It made up around 1% of the volume in the Baths of Caracalla, yet accounted for 50% of the cost. Another material that was used quite often in the Roman Empire was opus reticulatum. It actually became the standard for Roman buildings under the rule of Augustus. An opus reticulatum is a facing that was pressed into concrete, and the facing comprised of pyramid shaped stones that were pressed into the concrete. Um, the stones could be mass produced easily, so that allowed for the building process to be expedited on site. Um, it was used to be decorative, but also added strength to the Roman walls.
Opus lateratium is another type of facing that was pressed into concrete. This facing was comprised of kiln-fired bricks, which basically makes the bricks more durable. It was introduced soon after opus reticulatum. The two were used during the same time period. Bricks were very easy to lay. Most of them are still standing on many sites, proving its durability. Both opus reticulatum and opus lateratium cost significantly less than opus incertum. Energy sources and manpower. The sources of energy that were used during the Roman Empire were mainly wood and charcoal. There was a division of labor during construction, which included architects, engineers, laborers, and decorators who each had their own job when constructing a building. Rome was fed through local farms and imports from the territories that they conquered. Aqueducts. They were used to transport water around Rome. They usually ranged from 10 to 60 miles long. They were 1,000 feet above sea level and maintained by slave labor. There were two levels, one for the bridge and one for the water. A basin connected to the aqueducts to store water in the city. To the right, you can see a picture showing how the water was transported to the city.
In ancient Rome, hydropower was also another way to get energy throughout the city. One of these cases is the water mill technology that they used, including the water wheel or water turbine, which moves and navigates water through the canals and into the city. It is also built by hand, and in this case, it was built by slaves. It is also used to grind grain, cut stone, and in most cases, it was marble. Horsepower was also used to rotate or spin the wheel at times. And the first clock tower was ran by this water wheel, and it was built years before other clocks were invented, so it was the first sense of any precise time. And to the right on top, you could see an image of an ancient water wheel in ancient Rome, and at the bottom, you can see some clock towers that are in ancient Rome still today. Next, we move on to the Baths of Caracalla. In these images, you can see what the Baths of Caracalla used to look like in ancient Rome. The Baths of Caracalla were built in 200 AD, and it took a total of 5 years to build. It was a very long and progressive project. To make this project, it took 9,000 workers, and marble was used, but only for 1% of the building. And as mentioned before, it cost almost 50% to use this material. Water was supplied by nearby springs, and it was warmed in boilers heated by furnaces. In the Baths of Caracalla, it included bathhouses, gathering areas, cold baths, warm and hot, saunas, steam rooms, sunbathing rooms, and many more. It also included entertainment, food, shows, and most of the time there was loud fellowship with your family. There also was exercise that you could do before the baths to get you ready for the bath. And also, the Baths of Caracalla to get in was free or very cheap, so even the poor could bathe here. To wrap everything up that we've been talking about in our presentation, ancient Rome used many different materials to build their cities, and these include mud brick, opus incertum, concrete, marble, opus reticulatum, and opus lateritium. They used more abundant, cheaper, and easier transport materials for basic buildings and structures of their city, and they used more expensive, dense, and bulky materials for special or more important buildings and designs. And this also included some of the designs that were in the Baths of Caracalla. And the Baths of Caracalla were very important to everyone living in Rome, including the rich as well as the poor. Everyone was welcome in there, and it was a very important piece of ancient Rome.